He's coming. He's just late. Yeah. So we're going to get started. My co-chair is on his way. This is the Ietf 121 meeting of the Quic working group. If that's not where you intended to be, I suggest you head elsewhere or stay here because we have nice, comfortable seats here. So we're getting pretty far into the week, but as usual, we would like to remind everyone of all the conduct here is done under the Ietf note well. Please familiarize yourself with all things in the note well. And of course, in addition to the note well, we have the section of note really well, and this mostly deals with the expectations around collaboration within the IETF, and the chairs take this kind of thing very seriously, as does the other leadership in the IETF, and please flag any concerns you might have according to the procedures that are enumerated on this slide. So this is, the meeting stuff. If you haven't already and you didn't scan the QR code, please do that, or go to the agenda and hit the little on-site tool so that we can record all our numbers. Based on the numbers, it seems like most people have done that, so thank you. And obviously for remote participants, please keep yourself muted unless you are presenting. That's just links. Okay, so admin, it is who wants to take notes? Oh, okay, that was quick. Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, that was easy. So yeah, chat is going to be on Meet Echo or Zulip. So that's pretty normal. The queuing is normal. We will manage the queue and lock it and remove people and all that. So okay, so moving on to agenda, we're starting off by talking about our adopted working group items as usual. As of right now, that is chiefly multipath and QLog. And then after that, we are going to move on to some other items. We have some potential new work, including quick address discovery, and we have a quick talk on FlexiCast. And with that, I'll welcome my co-chair, Lucas, to the big stage. And so this is another thing we wanted to just note is that we have some drafts that have been sitting around for a while, somewhat blocked or just waiting on things like implementation. So reliable reset is in this bucket. There was quite a bit of urgency around this in terms of it being asked for by other working groups, but things seem to have stalled out a little bit on people implementing this and interrupting this. So it would be useful if we could do that. And Lars has entered the queue. And what would you like to say, Lars?
Hi, Lars Jacob Mozilla. So we have an implementation of egg frequency. It's not the latest draft. We're going to update it soon. And we also want to do the reliable reset. So I'll expect that to happen before the next ITF.
That is good news. I will remind people that ACK frequency was something that we were talking about at Quic interims before the pandemic. So we're not doing so great on this one. This was something we actually considered putting in the original RFC. So it would be great if we could really get this one cleared out. Miria, you want to say something?
Yeah, Kulim and Ericsson, we have two implementations of egg frequency actually. Okay, mine is not complete, but nearly. But we also, as the authors, we have like one minor tiny little thing we need to figure out and submit potentially a new version. But I think we're in good shape here.
Magnus?
Magnus Westerlund Ericsson. Yes, I observed during interop testing for Quic that you actually receiving ACK frequency and reacting to ACK frequency is done between Quic as setting and Rusk as receiving. So actually observed at least one interoperability point for ACK frequency.
Mike Bishop, I'm just wanting to observe that there's a little bit of a contradiction in terms between reliable reset being desperately and urgently needed by other working groups and there not being any implementations. If they need it, they should be implementing it too.
Yes, I would agree with that. So I think, David, are you attempting to scan your QR code and join? You can go ahead.
After Christian.
Yeah, oh yeah, Christian, go ahead first.
Okay, so first, I mean, Quic has an implementation of ACK frequency. We're having that for years now. So it's, I kind of, I was assuming that ACK frequency was in the RFC editor queue. So, second, if it is not in the ACK editor queue, then we have an issue of compatibility between ACK frequency and Quic multipass. The reason being that if you want to do multipass correctly, you need to run ACK frequency separately on each path. It's a minor extension to ACK frequency, but if we are delayed, then we have a cascade of delay because we also need to have an extension to ACK frequency for multipass. And I don't know whether we want to do that now or whether we want to wait until ACK frequency is in fact in the RFC editor queue and then do the extension.
As a point of procedure, I don't think there's any reason we'd have to not start work on a multipath ACK frequency given until we just can't publish that RFC before the ACK frequency one, which I hope wouldn't happen.
Yeah, if you managed to publish multipath before ACK frequency, something went wrong. David Skenazy, speaking in this case as Web Transport Chair. Yeah, so Web Transport is a group that needs reliable reset. And as I said at previous meetings, thank you so much to the Quic working group for getting that one through quickly. We might get that before ACK frequency, even though we started 4 years afterwards. But in terms of implementation, I don't know if Victor's in the room. It's very late and early in the US right now. But I know him and Martin Duke have been working on that. So how close are we, Martin? Give me a... Yeah, close. All right. So Google's working on it, and I suspect some of the other web transport enthusiasts are working on it. I could see there's one in the queue. I think that'll help a lot with getting this out the door. So yes, please keep implementing this, folks. And Martin, if you want to comment on how hard that was, that might be helpful to motivate people, because the sense I got was that it wasn't crazy.
Mia Kulevin, to reply to Christian's point on ACK frequency and multipath, I think if you want to do something, this is something for the multipath draft to do, not for the ACK frequency draft. Or like a separate extension. Transfer parameters are also cheap.
Alan Frindell from Meta. I want to point out that as a mock chair, the MOQ group has also directly added reliable reset into the latest MOQT draft. And so we will also be directly dependent on that, in addition to being indirectly dependent on it through web transport. And I know that people are working on an implementation in MoveFast. So it's coming.
Kazuhoku. So we also have implementation for both of them. I think it's not the lack of implementation, but lack of interoperability testing. So if maybe some folks would gather and agree on where we'll do an interop testing, then I think it might be helpful.
I agree with that, by the way.
Yeah, Martin Duke, Google. The quick part of reliable reset is almost done. Like it'll be done in a week or something. Plugging in through web transport is dependent on Victor, and I'm not going to speak for him. It sounds like we have a bunch of act frequency implementations. Like I don't think we should set like too hard of a. And to be clear, we are not one of them. But like, like I mean, I don't know how many implementations people want to see, but like. Seems like a couple is well beyond like Ietf norms.
Zahed, do you have any commentary as the AD on the implementation front and what you'd like to see or nothing? Because like the standard here is somewhat flexible. Standard as in the bar, not the standard as in.
So Jahed here. So my thinking is if the working groups and the implementers think they have implementation that's interops and that works, there is evidence of that one, we are fine, right? It's not the number, it's the quality. I think I press for, like, obviously to do interop you at least need two. so that's the minimum bar, but it's about, like, I think now what I'm hearing, like we have reliable reset is upcoming and people are implementing act frequency have number of implementation they can do some interop. Perhaps we can target, like, next hackathon we have some sort of like interop test and we say like we have done the interop and implementation part of it. But just to remind us, like Quic working group has a very high bar on implementation in interoperability requirements, so we should not loosen that one. So as I said, it's not a number of how many, but it's the quality of implementation and people are using it. Make sense?
Yep. David?
To add to what Zahed said, I think what's a little special about act frequency compared to other things is that it's like a performance feature. And so implementing it and saying, hey, we're exchanging these frames, success is one thing, and like deploying at scale on the internet and realizing, oh, this actually helped, versus, ooh, it turns out that it only works if you implement it this way, but that way doesn't. Let's add a paragraph in the spec to say where the landmines are. So I think, like, for this, I know our bar is really high, but I think that's what's made us really successful in Quic. And having like any of these implementations that have like a real world deployments, having some data there would be super helpful. And I can at least talk to the Google people and like stare at them. I think they're working actively on it. It's just it's been taking a minute.
Mia Kulevan again. I actually wanted to say something similar, but like in the opposite direction. So the interrupt testing is really like, can you receive and send a frame? That's like super simple. But the logic behind it, that is, you can't interrupt test that. And it's also, because it interacts with congestion control and so on, it's also something that I think it's not only enough to deploy it, it's also you have to try it with different congestion controls and whatever. So I don't think we actually can do it right now. I think we have to put the protocol out there or the extension out there. And then, you know, if we actually detect a problem, we want to do something, then we have to reopen it again in a later point of time. You don't have to publish the RFC to put it out there, but like I'm not sure what we are really waiting for, because we might or might not detect a problem. So like I think we should just not keep this, like delay this. We just should like say we're done for now, and if there's anything we want to do in future, let's do it.
Kazuhoku, I agree with Miria. We are waiting for browsers to implement act frequency, because from our previous experiments, we know that it's going to have performance benefits for us. So please implement and please finalize the RFC. And that's our hope.
Okay, I think that was a pretty good discussion. I would encourage, we'll see if for reliable reset in particular, if there's any value in like trying to schedule some sort of virtual interop testing or something, or if that can wait for the hackathon at Bangkok, but we'll follow up on that. And then I agree, reliable reset, it's much harder to reason about interop testing. It's closer to interop testing, congestion control, right, which isn't really a thing. Okay, so I think with that, we're going to move on to our first topic, which is going to be multipath. Do you want to do the slides or do you want to do the remote? It might work. Okay. We'll see if it works.
So this one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Yame. Today, I will introduce the updates for multipath extension for Quic. Seems not working.
Okay, it didn't work.
Okay, please. So we will have four parts today. First will be the brief summary for the updates from draft 10 to draft 11. And then I will introduce the hackathon reports for the draft 11. And the most important part is about the open issues we have left. And also in the last, we will discuss about the next step for the multipath extension. So next slide, please. Okay. So first of all, the semantic changes from the draft 10 to draft 11, we don't have much here, but I will introduce them one by one. The first one is that we allow the endpoints to send the packets without challenge if the for tuple address has already been validated before. That's a little change. And also we have redefined the error code for pass abandon frame. We have removed the reason phrase because people are not using it, but we keep the error code phrase as necessary, and we will have more detailed discussion later. And the third one is that we add a pass blocked frame inside draft 11 to tell the peer that the maximum pass ID limit has been reached so that new passes cannot be created. So it's kind of like an informational frame here. So for all these semantic changes, we have updated the transport parameter for draft 11. So next slide, please. I've listed all the frame updates here from draft 10 to 11, but most of them are just renaming. We remove the prefix of MP and use pass as a prefix instead. We're using pass ACK here and also pass new connection ID and pass retire connection ID because all these frames are using under one pass. And also we renamed the pass standby to pass backup. It's a more accurate naming. And we add pass blocked frame as a new frame here in draft 11 to tell the peer that the maximum pass ID limitation has been reached so that the peer could do something. The next slide, please. There are also some editorial changes from draft 10 to draft 11. I'm not going through the details here. For example, we are claiming that the pass ID sequence should start from 0 for each passes. And also we add more guidance on the key rotation and also on how to use the pass ACK frames. So if people are interested in the details, you could check the drafted documents. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have the hackathon reports for draft 11. This time, I'm glad to see that one more implementation has participated in this time's hackathon. So we have 4 clients here and 5 servers here, and we have nearly draw 4 table here. I like to say that we are really making big progress here, and everyone is doing a great job. And also we add pass blocked frame for one of the cases, and I'm glad to see that several implementations has already support that. So next slide, please. Okay, so this part we will quickly go through all the issues left on the GitHub. First, I will introduce 3 small issues which has already have a solution on the pull requests. The first one is the 455. The last sentence in the pass abandon frame section says, after sending the pass abandon frame, the endpoint must not send frames that use the pass ID anymore. Even on other network passes, actually that sentence is not correct. We have a correct version in the pass close section. Well, what is the truth is that you can still send in pass ACKs for the pass which has already been sent pass abandon. So we replace the incorrect sentence with the reference to the correct one. The second one is about the pass abandon error code. I'm sorry to say that we have made a mistake in the current draft that we are using two values two values for the error codes which has exceeded the 62-bit variable integer. So it cannot be encoded into the variable integer. And we have quickly fixed that. And so now it's not a problem for the implementations. And the third one is about the issue 461. It's about the pass blocked frame is informational. Actually, we have finding the interrupt test that some of the implementations are waiting for the max pass ID after they send the pass blocked frame. Actually, that's not true. That's not necessary because this is just an informational signal for the endpoints to inform the peer. But it's a decision by the peer that when to send the max pass ID to increase the upper load for the pass ID limit. So we have add some text for that part in the pull request. Okay, so next slide, please. So we have 4 issues left on the GitHub. The first one is 459. What happened if endpoints doesn't issue CIDs for each available pass ID? Actually, we have a recommendation here in the current draft. It's recommended to issue a connection ID for at least one unused pass ID so that the peer would always have an unused pass ID for creating the new pass. But actually, we have corner cases in real world when because the pass new CID frames can only be sent after the pass max ID frame, so that where there will be a short period of time that the peer don't have an available CID for the new pass. So what we are asking here is, should we redesign the pass blocked frame and add one field for this kind of situation, for a clear signal for this kind of situation to inform the peer that the endpoint cannot creating a new pass because of lack of new CID? So do people has comments on this part?
If and when the queue loads. Eric Kinnear, Apple. For server preferred address, didn't we make it just come with a new CID? Instead of changing the path blocked frame, why can't we change the like max path ID or one of the other frames to just have them come together instead of trying to figure out what I do if I lose one frame but I get the other one?
Amir Kulevin, because it's going in the wrong direction, Eric. You're sending the black block frame from the one peer that needs more CIDs, and the CIDs come in the other direction. The problem we're talking about is that you don't have a CID and you want to tell the other end about it. And we don't have a way to do that at the moment.
I don't think it works super well because if I give you a max path ID that's like way higher than what you have right now, I don't really want to give you a whole pile of CIDs. But the idea was rather than saying, I don't have a CID, but I'd like to use a path, make that impossible by just making sure that every time I let you use a path, I also give you a CID. But I think the problem with that is if I give you 50 path IDs, I don't really want to hand you 50 CIDs.
I think that's what the draft already is trying to do, but apparently it's not impossible because you had a problem in the interrupt testing. So if you actually do a mistake and you don't provide a CID, it can happen. It is possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to reinforce that. It's by nature asynchronous because even if you do give a CID, I mean, it can also disappear after because someone consumes it. There are all kinds of issues like that. And so, yeah, I mean, there is a condition there. You cannot make it impossible. I would rather keep what we have and give implementation guidance. In practice, if you send them in the same packet, they will arrive at the same time.
Maybe you can go to the next slide because there is one point that is related and maybe that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Okay, so for the next issue, it's about the error code for pass abandon. We have already redefined the pass abandon frame. We just use the error code and remove the reason phrase. And we already have two error code here. The first one is the application abandon, which means one pass is closed because the application layer want to. And the second one is about the resource limit reached, which means one pass is closed because the endpoint has some local resource limit, like the memory limit or some socket FD limit, such things. So we have two general error codes here. And the question is, do we need more error codes here, such as the unstable interface and no CID available, such things? Yeah, we want to hear your suggestion.
And so this, maybe this is what we want for the previous issue, have this error code saying no CID available. So if you close the path, at least the other endpoint knows that's the reason why, and then it can decide to send you new CIDs and open a new path again.
Magnus Westlund, I don't think that helps that particular issue. The issue is that you want to have more paths. You have a peer that said, I can do more paths, but it hasn't provided enough SIDs for new path IDs. That's where I think actually putting in a flag in paths blocked might actually be a very good solution for indicating, hey, I want to open a path, I can't because you haven't provided a SID. At least get that into logs, etc., and maybe get implementations addressed, etc., or being at least knowing that okay, we have some contention in between what we're doing and what the peer wants to do, so that becomes visible.
We could do that if people need. And more comments?
Lucas Pardew speaking as an individual and error code enthusiast. If I just think hearing this discussion, for me, if you're expecting the peer to do something in reaction to seeing this, using an error code is not a good design choice because it's got like 62 bits of possible future people putting stuff in there and asking you to do things, and you might need to grease these things, or you might need to like avoid being DOSed in some way that you're being compelled to do something. So if you need a reaction to happen, put that in a separate field, maybe as a simple bit or a binary or some other indicator that could be enhanced by an error code. But the mantra was kind of always just, this is useful for debugging and logging, not necessarily immediate reaction. And so if you have a stack that kind of follows that mantra, it's just going to ignore these effectively. It's just treated as ancillary data that's completely untrusted and toxic.
Yeah, no, actually, I think it's okay because we're actually talking about two cases, as Magnus just said. One is you want to open a pass yourself and you don't have a CID, and the other one is you get a new pass, but the other peer didn't send you a CID, so you cannot reply to it. And in this case, it's an error. You have to close it, and then this information you can lock it, or you could actually act on it by providing CIDs, but it's not that you expect it, because it's the other end that wants to open the pass. I don't know.
I could comment on the PR, just to add my individual opinion here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if we want to solve that correctly, I'm with Lucas there. We don't want a new error code so much as we want a new frame that says, I am blocked because I don't have a pass ID for this frame, for this pass. And the cost is minimal, and it will be much more expressive if we want to do that.
Okay, that sounds like we should create a PR and then have more discussion.
Yeah.
Can I, because you brought this up with this unstable interface error code, and like we already discussed if that's the right name or what we actually want, can I ask you to comment on that?
Commenting as an individual, trying to remember what I said about unstable interface. I think that that sounds like it's the right direction. I don't know if anybody else, but I think that that's a real issue. So
Next slides. Okay, this issue is about handling of the PTO. We are considering such a scenario. Endpoints send a lot of packets on one pass, and suddenly this pass turned into a backhaul, and all these packets cannot get acknowledgement back. Following FCA 9000, as the endpoint cannot get any SKs back, these packets are not considered lost until a PTO happens. So actually, I think there is one potential benefit for multipass here, because endpoints could choose to retransmit earlier on other available passes for this kind of situation, but it depends on when does this packets are considered lost. So should we add such mechanism, or do people have comments on this issue?
Yes. I think that the emphasis on 9002 is a bit extreme. It'd be nice. I mean, I agree with that. It'd be nice to have first, but there's absolutely nothing in the draft or in RC 9000 that prevents you from sending a same frame twice on several paths. So you can do that at any time. If I remember correctly, one of the reasons for the design was the experience of Alibaba sending the same frames on several paths when the path was dubious. So we have several implementations already doing that. It's not impossible.
Exactly.
So,
Are you doing this, Christian, in your implementation?
yes.
When are you deciding to send it on the other path?
On the first PTO. Yes. But yeah, I mean, I agree. We should have a note saying, "Hey, consider doing that, maybe in the implementation." But it's not any kind of protocol violation. So the only thing we need is some kind of implementation note. Yes.
Eric Kinnear, I would second exactly what Christian said. Like, you can already just send the packets on every path just in case. So maybe a recommendation of right around when you would have expected to get an ACK, and maybe you can be more aggressive than you would have been for a full PTO. Like, I would be fine being slightly more aggressive, but yeah, already allowed everything else Christian said.
But I guess that's the point. It's allowed, but like you are more aggressive. So the question is like, how much aggressive do we want to give a recommendation? What's the right thing to do?
I think a recommendation that is marginally more aggressive than on a single path is fine. Other than that, every implementation is going to have to tune that for their unwillingness to use data on different paths anyway. So like whatever we put here is nice, but not going to be the thing that decides whether or not it goes.
Okay. I agree about the implementation recommendation here as a reasonable remediation of this issue. I just want to point out that if the upper bullet there on the slide is actually wrong, the packet is only lost when you actually get an ACK for that path. So it's you need to ACK that path, and not when you send a PTO. It's not considered lost already then. It's according to RFC 9002. So it's worse than what you describe in some senses, that you actually need to get some data across to consider these packets lost on that path. But I mean, the big remedy here is to retransmit the outstanding data on some other path while you keep on sending PTOs on the upper path or abandon the path.
So did I understand this correctly? Like if you strictly follow your RFC 9002, you say you'd never declare the packets lost?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Speaking as an individual, whenever we're talking about things like aggressiveness with something like multipath, I would personally be very cautious of putting anything like that, because I don't think we know enough to say things about this in terms of like what's strictly better or advisory. So I would lean towards, unless we have overwhelming implementation and deployment experience that says one way is better, leave it up to implementations.
Jana Iyengar. I just wanted to note that aggression or being more aggressive is a function of what you have available to you. It's not retransmitting, it's a sending of packets when you don't have available congestion window, for example. So if you have available congestion window, there's nothing that should prevent you from sending it. In fact, we do that already in some implementations, even on a single path, that you don't have to wait for a PTO. If you have available congestion window, you can start retransmitting early. It's sort of a form of early, it's a form of FEC, if you think about it that way. So I don't see any reason why it should be prevented. If you have the window to do it on the other path, please go ahead.
So basically, we could add some suggestions in the draft, but we will let implementations to do that decision. Yeah. So next slide, please. Okay, so this one is the last issue, I think. Yeah, that's good. So this one is about the path migration or creating a new path under this kind of situation. The use case is that if endpoints wants to use a new full tuple for sending packets, we have two choices here. You can create a new path to follow this goal, and also you could do a path migration under the same path ID. And considering endpoints receive a new packet here, actually what happens here, if you are using a different path ID, it's definitely for a new path. But if you receive the packet which is DCID belonging to the same path ID, then the three situations happen here. If it's using the same path ID and the same for turbo, it's definitely using the same path. But if it's using the same path ID and different for turbo, it could happen to be treated as a net rebinding or a migration here. So we would like to add some implementation guidance here for this kind of situation with the same path ID and different for turbo here. Actually, the net rebinding is by default, and we have two choices here. The first one is that implementations could choose to create a new path to avoid the complexity of switching path content. The second choice is here is to accept the complexity and keep compatible with the path migration like we are doing in FC 9000. And we have a related issue here for 160. It's about using the preferred address is considered as a path migration event in the draft 11. So these two issues are exactly the same issue. So I think Christian might have more comments. on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that in RFC 9000, we have this method of doing path migration by testing several CIDs in parallel and eventually picking the one that we like when we make the decision to do an actual migration. So if you take the classic parking lot scenario, what you would do is that while you're in the building connected to Wi-Fi, you will test whether you have continuity on a cellular path, just in case. And you will never actually decide to use that path, and the client will not send any data on that path, so that the server knows that because it doesn't receive any data on that path, it should not be using that path even though it's validated. And then later on, when you're walking on the parking lot and Wi-Fi starts going bad, then at that point, the client moves data on that new path, and the server knows that at that point, it shall use it, and the old one is eventually retired. Now, that's a bit of a clunky mechanism, and I think that the first thing we have with multipass is that we have a very clean make before break method. In the same scenario, in multipass, we would create a new path for cellular when we are still connected to Wi-Fi. We'll place that new path in a backup state. And then later on, we will abandon the Wi-Fi path and we'll place the other path in the available state. So I think that using path migration for that scenario in which you want to migrate your connection from using one path to using the next one provides a very clean make before break scenario and doesn't have any of the side issues of being confused with NAT rebinding, etc. So it's very clear that it should be preferred. I mean, I don't see any reason that. Now, given that it should be preferred, the question is whether implementation can do away with the extra complexity of also managing the old path migration way. And personally, I don't like that complexity. I mean, in the case of Pico Quic, I'm trying to do an implementation that's as small as possible for various embedded systems. And that extra complexity hurts. If I have to support that scenario, I can definitely support the NAT rebinding scenario, but NAT rebinding is a much simpler scenario than path migration. In particular, in the case of NAT rebinding, we don't have to be worried about waiting for the client to decide to use the path, because by definition, it's already using it. So we don't have all the long-term conditions and things like that. My personal proposal is to support path rebinding, but not support the RFC 9000 still path migration. That was what I had. Lorenzo, please.
Yeah, so make before break sounds good on paper, but I think in the scenario that you mentioned where you're sort of trying cellular, I think we need to, at least on mobile devices, cellular is basically suicidally expensive. It's really, 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 really expensive. Even sending a single packet will cost you a lot of battery because the modem goes back to idle only after like 10 seconds. It's like really something you have to be very careful about. Like, for example, if you do this, once every 5 minutes, you will basically drain your battery at the end of the day by like a couple of percentage points. It's really expensive. So the other thing to consider is that in real networks, even often in IPv6, the sort of firewall timeouts for incoming traffic back down to the device are depressingly short, like 50 seconds. And so even if you did do this sort of backup thing, you'd have to keep it alive really often. And again, if your modem timeout is on the order of 10 seconds and the firewall timeout on the mobile network is 50 seconds, then you're talking about keeping the modem up 25% of the time. And that's like what a 20 milliamp drain. So it's really expensive. I'm not saying that I just wanted to provide that data. I don't know how to solve this problem, but we should think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Lorenzo, that you're making a very good point that we have to be careful with using several paths at the same time because some paths are going to burn the batteries. That's typically an implementation issue. It's not really a protocol issue because the two ways that I was describing of doing make before break have the same effect on the battery. You will still need to do the keep alive and that kind of stuff. But it's a good point. It's kind of one of the reasons why a lot of the multipath execution should not be over specified because we are going to learn all this kind of experience that you are mentioning when we are actually trying to use it.
But one thing I wanted to mention is if you do break before, if you do sort of path migration, the connection migration style, you actually don't have this problem because it's the client that initiates when it sees that somehow if it detects that downstream connectivity is flaking, it can initiate that without having without having to pre-warm the backup path. So just saying that there's another way.
The question is whether you do pre-warm or not. I mean, you can decide to not do pre-warm whether we do the migration or the path transition. It'll be about the same number of packets on the wires anyhow.
Eric, to Lorenzo's point, I don't know that I was imagining 5 minutes before we would pre-warm something. We tend to have a pretty good signal a little bit before things are bad. Say I'm going from Wi-Fi to cell. We know that it's getting worse, but it's not necessarily bad enough to be worth paying the potential monetary cost of using cellular. So we potentially have seconds of warning as opposed to minutes of let's pre-warm. But to Christian's point, I think in either case, it's really how do we spell this behavior? I think we do very much want the ability to, and when we talked about this in the original migration stuff as well, right? We want the ability to bring up that path, get started on building up a congestion window, maybe get a round trip or two in before we're trying to use it for realsies. So I think really the question is just how do we want to spell that? Do we want to keep having two ways to spell that thing? Or do we say, if you're using multipath, you just must do it that way and forget that migration was a thing?
Exactly. Would you have any concerns to use multipass instead of migration?
For the spelling of this particular flow, I think it's probably okay to just go down to just multipath. That sentence in general has its own implications on cost and everything else.
Just to clarify that I don't understand this. I'm just trying to. One thing I wanted to say is as long as there's a way for the migration to not require pre-warming and to be entirely client initiated, that's fine from a sort of battery perspective.
Yeah, it's in both case client initiated, and we're not making any recommendation requirements on pinging or keeping alive the new path and multipath. So you can just open a path and keep it up forever as long as the other end is still supporting it.
Mike Bishop, I'm actually wondering more about the case where you don't know about in advance, because one of the things that we keep coming back to in designing the multipath flows is you're bringing up a new path, you're exchanging things on there to see if it works, and it's okay because you have your original path that you know is good. But in the case where, let's say, the user just turned off Wi-Fi, or the user ran out of the building and the phone didn't have that couple seconds of warning, does it change this flow that the client suddenly has to start sending from a different IP address and does not have the old one? Can it necessarily spin up a new path with exactly the same resources, or does it just start sending on the old path ID from the new address? And that's a NAT rebind, even though the NAT is actually a change of ISP.
I think it's actually the same because we're using the same path validation, right? You would do both in both cases. The only difference is that you use a new path ID, and so the other end has a very explicit signal that it has to create new state for this path. And then you have to close the old path manually, basically, but you can do that on the new path.
And if you don't have a spare path ID, the connection just dies at that point.
Yes, I mean the flip side of that is that when you create a new path, you create a new state for congestion control. So doing an explicit path is somewhat cleaner because you have a new state for congestion control and you don't inherit stuff like the RTT and the average throughput that is backed into your congestion controller from the old path.
Yeah, so migration already requires that you reset that, and I understand you'd like to simplify that code and make it explicit.
Yeah.
I also worry a little bit about, would a client maybe decide to game that by not changing the path ID, even though it's supposed to try and get you to keep your congestion control state?
Jana Iyengar, I was about to raise the same point because I'm a little bit confused about this. Like maybe I'm a little bit confused about this, but a client here that receives an indication that it's a new path is going to be quite surprised because it did not initiate anything and it doesn't see any changes in the 4 tuple, right?
Well, the new path is always created by the client. We are not changing that part of RFC 9000.
Right, but the client is seeing the same 4 tuple. So why would it change any state?
That's the issue with 9000 in general.
So net rebinding always has to be supported, but the difference for net rebinding in the general migration case, for net rebinding, you immediately know you have the new path and only the new path. You don't have to maintain state for like this weird situation where
Right.
you don't know where you are.
Yeah. Okay, but in general, the thing I was going to say is that if it's a migration, if it appears like a migration, it just makes sense to keep the migration. There's going to be overlap between multipath and migration. We always knew that, right? Like path migration was going to be a stopgap until we had multipath to do it.
Again, you need migration for path rebinding. You want to definitely keep that. But for the other case where you kind of proactively figure out if you want to use a new path or switch over, we have now 2 mechanisms for the same thing.
Yep, I understand. I'm sorry, I don't have much more to add right now.
Okay, I think we're going to move on from that list.
Yeah, so yeah, we have come to the next step. So long as we have very few issues left, so what about the next step? So is it the right time for the working group last call? I think this question might be for the chairs.
Lars, did you want to come? We're going to do a show of hands, not on this particular question, but a different question. But okay, the show of hands we're actually going to do is, have you read a recent version of the multipath draft?
Did you start something? Because we don't see it. Oh, yes.
I just hit start. And please use a reasonable definition of recent and not interpret that as any. Okay, and for the note takers, that's stabilized. Well, yes says 14 and no is 30 and no opinion 2. Not sure how you can have no opinion on that, but Lars?
Maybe it means no, don't remember. Lars Eggert. So on the working group last call thing, although you didn't say that you wanted feedback, you're going to get it anyway. So I've been struggling with this document a little bit because it tries to cover a lot of ground, right? And the title is very generic and says multipath quick. And some of the text reads like, if you implement this, your quick will now be multipath, congratulations. And then when you look into a bit more of the details, you realize, oh, it also says you gotta, find a congestion controller that works, and maybe there's LIA, which is experimental, and there's some other researchy stuff. And oh yeah, you also need to find a packet scheduler that works, and we're not really going to tell you what it is. And so in my mind, there's sort of parts of this draft that I can see going forward soon, and maybe even as proposed standard. And those are maybe the pieces that deal with, here's how you establish and maintain multiple paths for a quick connection, right? Like the signaling bits, although we just saw there's interactions with connection migration that are still not fully explored. So maybe even those parts are still a little bit worthy of discussion. But the parts where it again goes, and there were some earlier slides on like, how do you like actually use this if you want to use those paths? I think there's a lot of question marks still. And I think we're far from clear on what it would look like to actually give guidance or a specification on the enabling multipath quick transmissions over a set of maintained multiple paths. I think we're sort of, we have the basics covered. Like we want to go away from the simplistic connection migration with this implicit path thing to something more explicit. I think those things are pretty well understood, and what the draft does is sort of reasonable. But I see sort of a lot of questions around, once you have those paths, what do you actually do with them so you like don't shoot yourself in the foot and you don't like land in unexpected consequences. And it's gonna get even worse because at the moment we have a limited set of implementations, and I think they're mostly focusing on a relatively small set of use cases. And I think once we see more interest for other use cases, we're going to find more issues in how you actually build a generic multipath quick. So in summary, because I don't want to rant, I think some parts I see as ready, and I can sort of see them go forward even as proposed standard. Other parts I have really my reservations about.
I really have a hard time understanding that point, because that is a discussion we had before we adopted the document, and we all agreed, we have consensus that we want to specify this mechanics and leave out the more research parts. And I think that's what the draft is doing. If that, I mean, we cannot just not say anything about scheduling. We have to tell you, you have to think about scheduling, right?
I think we all agreed is maybe a little bit strong, and also, you know, people can change their mind. So I think this was a useful exercise, but I think the result that we have now is something where some pieces are more baked than others. And, you know, maybe that wasn't the result that we envisioned starting out, but at least in my view, that's the result we're now left with or in. And so I want to sort of find something to move forward with, right? Because if it's like a take it or leave it thing, then I don't think it's ready.
Sorry, I still don't understand, because I thought the part, I fully agree, there are parts that are less baked, but I thought we are actually not covering them in the draft. I thought we already have the parts that are the mechanics
right,
in
so
the
then
draft.
maybe it's a scoping text that needs adjustment, because I read the draft and it sounds, in the beginning especially, sounds like implement this and you're going to get multipath quick. And that's not what you get.
Lars, I'm curious, how does this differ from your opinion on the other multipath protocols that are floating around that have been standardized? Or
while I was chair, I didn't pay a lot of attention to this, right? So I recently came back into the technical world, and I basically starting fresh. We're looking at this and figuring out like, would I implement this, and how what would we do with it, and so I don't think I would implement this because nobody else seems to be, like, or at least on the website, right? But the pieces that I could sort of understand in a way that I could write code for them are probably the ones that are related to establishing and maintaining multiple paths. And when I then go, how would I actually use them to like do a multipath web with Quic? There are a whole bunch of things.
They are not in the draft, but I'm happy to.
Yes, so
yeah.
But so then the draft needs to say, you know, you're not going to get multipath quick if you implement this. You're going to get something that will enable you towards getting multipath quick if you add other pieces that we're not going to tell you what they are or how they work. Right?
So I mean, we can do more of that, but the introduction says this doesn't support you in like exchanging addresses. It doesn't tell you how to schedule a packet. It doesn't tell you about congestion control. That's in the introduction.
But a lot of the issues today were exactly about that.
The issues
we should
today...
give implementation guidance on PTOs and so on and so forth, right?
folks, as the chair interrupt, this is a good conversation.
Anyway, I'm gonna.
No,
I've said my
um,
piece.
Yeah,
So, but I want to say one more thing. I want to do an editorial pass on the document. We need to do that.
Okay, as the chair interrupt, I was about to say, look, the editorial team, together with the people who've been very active on multipath, have been doing a really good job over the last year, draining these design issues that we've had and navigating that. I think I want to thank them for that. There's clearly a path for editorial and wordsmithing, and maybe breaking this out into things that are clearly normative, maybe even things that should actually go in an appendix, and we can have that discussion. So I'd like to encourage people who voted no, they haven't read a recent draft, to do that, and please collaborate. I think I would like to see maybe a proposal for restructuring the document in such a way that it could achieve some of the stuff that Lars is saying.
Rename it, because the name is very generic and over promises.
Lars, we have documents from the Ietf called multipath TCP and multipath
Yeah, we
DSCP. Like, I mean, I don't really, I think the
Anyway.
branding thing is, that ship has sailed. Multipath means it's just, it uses multiple paths.
Correct.
It doesn't mean it's like a
But I
comprehensively
think we can
solved
learn
problem.
we can learn from past mistakes. Anyway, I'm
So
gonna say.
I think we can make some progress. Anyway, Brian, very briefly, please.
Yeah, I mostly came up to say what you said. I think what I would want to underline here is there seems to be a little bit of confusion about where the line is between what we specify in the mechanics and what we allow you to bring as your own. And like we did this in Quic as well, right? Like we had like the minimum congestion controller, but we understand that you're probably going to implement something else. Maybe making that clearer when you do the editorial pass, right? It's like, these are the things that you get. These are the things that you need to bring. I think the confusion here is around the fact that for most of those that we left out of Quic, that is stuff that people are already using in production with their own TCP things, whereas here it's a little more researchy. So I think we need to be careful about that. I am also calling myself out as I'm one of the no people. I will switch that to yes in the next couple of weeks. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're done. I think the chairs will go away and have a chat. I'm not going to comment explicitly. I have some opinions on this, but yes, we'll coordinate with the editors team. I think we need at least another draft revision based on the feedback, and we need to resolve those issues. So is that clear enough? Okay.
Just quickly on the timeline, so because we're trying to, I mean, like, we went down from I don't know how many issues to like 3 or something. So we're trying to actually get this done quickly. Would we want to think about an interim or something, or do we, like, what's the timeline?
I don't know. I'm more than happy to help or arrange an interim if maybe we could get a feel for who might want to participate in that. Even if it's just the editorial team, I think that could be useful if you folks think it's useful. We're over time, Lorenzo, I'm sorry. Could you post it to the chat or the list? Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Lucas. I would take my Quic chair hat off, but I forgot to put it on in the literal sense, but I've been wearing it in the figurative sense just then. I'm going to talk about Qlog today. We have 3 different drafts. I'm merely the vessel for a lot of this discussion. I'm trying to reflect different viewpoints and opinions. We are an editorial team. Robin is remote, I believe, and I would encourage Robin to dive in to correct anything I might missay, specifically on one of the topics we have. But in terms of putting my hat back on quickly, I'll try and get through this quickly. I don't think we need lots of time. There is a bike shed issue, but we are over in the agenda, but I think we have enough way to pull it back to make sure all the as time permits talks are done. So just keep that in mind if you have some opinions. But anyway, since the last drafts, there's not been that much change. We solved the timestamps / clock issues, if you recall those being discussed. That's been open for a long time. It's a minor issue, but it kind of, for a logging format where every event has a timestamp in it, it's something that was important to resolve. personally, I've done some implementation experience around that, which kind of prompted some of that work anyway. It works for me. I'd love to know if it works for others or doesn't work for them specifically. If we don't hear anything, we're just going to move on, as we do. Just after we cut the last draft, we spotted one more gap in the extensibility of the schema based on, just putting some custom stuff in. The log format's very extensible. You can stick whatever you want in there, but how do you express that? We discussed this ad nauseum before, but we spotted this one. And as a editorial team tried to come up with ways to solve it that got even more complicated, which was a kind of a bad smell that maybe we hadn't quite got the previous design right. What we've come up with is a net outcome of something even simpler than last time in terms of what the data model is. We've removed what the categories are, and in the process of doing that, we allow even more fluid extension and adding to existing namespaces, which is something that we prevented previously to avoid kind of type aliasing, which was super nasty, et cetera, et cetera. It's simple to, you can see, it renders pretty bad, but basically the outcome here is where we had something like the Quic schema that had connectivity events like server listening. Now it's just Quic. We had these super generic categories like connectivity or security, and along with a design that said basically first come, first serve in terms of those category names. You can never extend them. And they were overly broad and a bit of a land grab, especially because those were not, we would not claim that they were fully complete. So now everything is in Quic. This is a Quic schema definition. Everything has a label called Quic. I did the implementation of this. It makes it more logical, it makes it simpler to do. It's just mostly code removal. So we think this is a net win. If you haven't been paying attention and you have stronger opinions, we'd love for you to take a look at the draft and maybe see how that might affect your implementation. It might look worrying up there, like, oh, all the event names have changed. They've been changing over the last few drafts anyway. There have been breaking changes. And I'll come on to that in a bit towards the end of the discussion. We just wanted to flag that up, as usual. Right, onto open issues for the draft. We have, say, around 20 open issues. Most of them are minor. They are just things that we feel we can make progress on as a team. But if anyone ever wants to go in the data track, the GitHub repo and put some comments in, we would like it. This is just flagging a few we would really, really like some input on. This is around the Lost Hammer updated event, issue 319. It's unclear if this is currently enough to help debug CC loss. We could use a review from it. Robin, this is about as much as I've got to say on the topic. Is there anything you would like to add that I've missed? I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to move on. Okay, but so some of these things are quite easy to review. We just need some domain expertise to say, oh, you're missing a field, or I don't like the name of that thing. That's effectively the only kind of level of review we're looking for. One of the other issues we've had open for a long time that I've personally, as an individual, kind of deviated back and forth on, of my opinion, is this idea of signaling somehow that when you're a sender of application data, that you could be blocked for some reason. What we have on the left is something Nick Banks kindly linked us to on that issue about 2 years ago, maybe even longer, which is what MS Quic's implementation does, or at least did at that snapshot in time. Maybe it's changed, evolved. I'm not sure. I can see Nick directly in front of me, but the details there don't strictly matter. What the rationale was that for at least one implementation, signaling this is quite useful. I always thought for mine it wouldn't be, but actually thinking about it again today, we have an API that allows us to send application data, and it could be blocked for various reasons. And we know that internally, and we have like a way of signaling that back to the client application that it was blocked and that they should retry at some other point. But there is a level of detail there that the reasons it's blocked could be things like flow control or congestion control. And although the application can't do much about that in our model, somebody who's trying to debug some weird congestion control interaction on some kind of weird path link that's a real edge case, we could probably benefit from that from ourselves. So I looked at how we could do this, and the issue we talk about maybe adding a new event. But again, in my model, having two events related to a single operation is kind of a bit like this issue we were discussing earlier. You get into having to combine them and join them in order to understand the context of what we were doing. So just quickly, I came up with an idea that we could add a new field to the operations we already have, these events for stream data moved and datagram data moved, where you're indicating that you're sending data between layers, right? So you're moving stream data from the application into the transport layer, and that could be blocked. This is an optional field, and this is just a proposal, right? So this is a blocked reason such as congestion control, copying those labels directly from what Nick had, because they seem pretty sensible. And if you're not blocked, you did succeed that stream moved operation, you can just not populate that field at all. It was successful. It isn't perfect, but it's easier than a new event. We could do a new event, it'd be fine, but we would need to kind of puzzle through some of those too. So if anyone's interested in this, it'd be really helpful to dive into that issue. This might be something that needs to kind of wait for some implementation. This is just something I came up with over the weekend when I had a bright spark. It might be something we don't actually want to do at all. The format's extensible. Maybe we just punt this to somebody does whatever they want, and we discover in the future it's useful and a useful way to do it. We all copy each other, and then at some point someone comes and standardizes this. Oh, I took this slide out. Okay. Right. We have something called JSON-SAC, a serialization format, which is an Ietf standard. And then this is our bike shed warning about what color do we want to paint our serialization formats. We spend a lot of time when we're talking about Qlog about the data model, well, at least for the last few years. But early on, we spent time talking about the serialization formats. We have JSON, which is nice and human-friendly and readable and accessible and all of this stuff. But there's also like a lot of discussion before about binary formats for compression or efficiency, et cetera, and we kind of moved away from those towards a single properly formed JSON type and then a serializing one, which is easier for implementations that are logging to use. For my own implementation, we've had that running for like at least 2 years, and it seems fine. We used to do something before that, and it was horrible. This is in terms of implementation and complexity, and it caused bugs, whereas the JSON-SAC format has been pretty good. It does have some sharp edges, which I'll talk about later on, but effectively what's nice in the sense of it being a standard is somebody else has already gone and done some of the work that would need to be done when you have file formats, right? We have a media type, so application JSON-SAC. We have structured syntaxes. The document says, when you're writing Qlog it out into JSON-SAC format, the media type is application Qlog plus JSON-SAC. That was just something we could do. And this is an example of the format taken from the VS Code editor. For those not super familiar with file formats, the way JSON works is you have this record separator character at the start of a line, and then your JSON event, object, whatever you want to call it, and then the next event has a record separator in front of it, so on and so on. And there's new lines at the end of these things, and there's not much to the RFC, but there are some talk about how you might handle kind of mangled data or how you might recover from a parsing error, stuff that's maybe useful sometimes or others. One of the benefits compared to other new line delimited formats for JSON is the fact that you can have new lines within the records. Some people hate this, but personally, I like it. So we have a tool that we use in the Quic project, which is this kind of like command line driven tool for probing and pushing around quick connections and doing some HB3, like quite low layer stuff to debug, test, etc. our implementations. When you run that tool, it will print out Qlog as a record of what you did, and then you can just rerun that back through the tool. So you don't have to keep typing out this command line entry. It's an input format. But what's nice is for a human then to open that file up and then just manually edit it. It's a bit hard to see here, but we have things like the method for HTTP land, or an authority. Maybe I want to copy this 10 times and just run a quick substitution, take my name out of this connection and put in some other vendors and see how they behave, maybe trying to understand, do some research on them or whatever. So this is an example where it could be beneficial, and it kind of deviates to some of the stuff we put in Qlog, that it's all about tooling and automation and this stuff. Like, we don't expect people just to kind of manually be hacking around with this. It would consume them, but maybe not be producing. But this can make it nice for certain events that are kind of long and verbose, that would just be on a single line and very hard to read as a human. This kind of thing is nice. But JSON-SAC isn't the only show in town. I kind of mentioned this. There are other formats, and we discussed these before. I wouldn't call them standards. They're in common use. There's somebody's written a spec and put it on a web page, but they claim to use media types, for example, but they're not formally registered yet. They say this stuff here and there, and there's some issues about, like, wouldn't it be great if we did actually go and do the work to register these things? The latter one there, JSON lines, has an issue that was opened in 2016. There wasn't much progress over those years, but actually recently, when I looked last night, there was some stuff in July 2024. So maybe those folks are invested in their format as a thing and want to follow the standards procedure to make this kind of more interoperable, all the reasons that media types are good. And there's this issue, again, I'm not an expert in those formats or the kind of stewardship of them, but there's, I want to say, recent discussion on a different issue about, like, what are even the differences between those two formats? Again, it's not rocket science. You have a piece of text and a new line at the end. Like, how hard can it be? But even for those similar things, they want to register different MIME types. So I don't know the history there. I don't know the politics, but to me, that's like an example of a kind of a problem we've already solved by using JSON-SAC, because that's what we're doing and it's already done. If we were to consider any other different format, we might be having to kind of help out and resolve some of the issues in those things. And I'll talk about the sharp edges of JSON-SAC format itself. One of those is this record separator character at the start of every line. Text viewer support kind of varies wildly. Again, these are kind of hard to see, I apologize, but the first one is VS Code. It shows this little RS thing. I think it's Vim that shows these kind of double caret weird thing at the top. Just normal text editors will show the common kind of Unicode unknown character thing. And it kind of does get a bit confusing if you're copy pasting these, say putting something on GitHub, you're trying to share some log files with people and it looks like maybe you corrupted something yourself just because those text renderers can't handle them. And it's inconsistent even. I think that's quite annoying too. One of the other things is that this format doesn't necessarily play that nicely without the box kind of general purpose tooling that we're familiar with. I mentioned Vim, but we have grep. We have these other line-oriented tools that many people are familiar with for data munging, processing, picking up issues, going through other application log file formats. When you use JSON-SAC and just print a single line, it's fine. When you use multi-line, then it kind of all breaks down. There are tools that are specialized for these formats, such as JQ itself, and it can handle various formats. It's pretty good, but it does need prompting. So you need to pass like this SAC option, and if you forget, if you're a newcomer and you come to just want to try and use your familiar process to reading log files from everything else, and you run this thing, it fails with a rather cryptic message and makes no sense. And again, you worried the log file's corrupt rather than the tool just didn't auto-detect the format and pick the right parser. I did create a tracking issue for this a couple of months ago and tried to make a PR. I don't understand this project, and I've been out of time. It's possible somebody else who is familiar with this could go and fix that. But even then, you're looking at probably years for that tool to be deployed to everyone's Linux distribution and do these things. So as always, there can be solutions, but they could take time. And as I noted before, this is annoying, especially for newcomers. Some of the counterpoints to those sharp edges that Qlog is a structured logging format. Most of the value that we think comes from it is from the special purpose tools that exist, things like QViz or anyone else who's built Qlog specific tooling or has kind of JQ based queries on the top. I see Martin in the queue. Do you want to comment now or no? Okay, cool. And that although we have these two formats, we totally expect people to define more, use their own private custom format. We expect transforms to exist. We expect if you're using the Qlog data model, you could just write out some proprietary binary format. And for interop interchange, if you were to share your log file with somebody else to put on an issue tracker, that you would maybe generate it to JSON so it's easier to read. And yeah, that's about it from that perspective. And to go back in time, unfortunately, just for the archaeology, going back through this issue we had about deciding we didn't always have JSON stack. We had kind of a new line delimited oriented thing, whether it was one of the other two I mentioned, I can't recall, but it came up during Ietf 111 that there was this JSON stack thing that we didn't even know about. And so we had this issue to discuss changing. Just some of the opinions that were on that comment were, some folks liked it, but felt it was gross, but it does solve the problem. But I think I still share that opinion. For me personally, it is annoying, but it's also quite useful. I personally could live with that. One of the other comments was, they prefer the line delimited one because it's actually more widespread in common usage. There's a standard and there's a de facto standards and tools and processes, et cetera, et cetera. And we came around to some of the discussion and resolved the issue by going with JSON stack and saying specifically at that time, we're going to try it and see how it goes. How painful is this thing? We could switch later if it turns out horrible somehow. And I don't know if it is horrible to the point we want to change. This is a bike shed topic, but it's something that's going to affect the work on Qlog that has been going on for a long time, and the editors would really like to just keep draining issues and get the draft done. And we can resolve this. There's ways we could resolve, and we could do more things, and we'd be willing to. But within our team, we of differing opinions, and hence why we're presenting today to get some more feedback or input on if we should do anything. We have some ideas about how we could resolve this. We could just do nothing, and we could just keep JSON stack and live with its pain points. We're not going to pretend they don't exist, but it's okay. You can always do different things if you'd like. We could formally try and switch to something. We would recommend some other format. Line-based without the record separated thing, but what would we pick? Would it be one of the commonly used things? Are we then trying to help them or push them into some of the MIME type issues, so media types, those kind of things that actually people are reliant on? If you have a media type, you can do things like integrate with libmagic, and it can do things that are nice. And again, there's an ecosystem kind of thing there. And then we could, it's totally feasible, but there's timing things there. We could just add another one. Options are great, right? If people really like single line delimited JSON, they could just add that on top of new line delimited. And you can even do that in an auxiliary document that's decoupled from the Qlog specs themselves and pursued. We expected people to maybe do this anyway in their own individual draft. And pursue that in a separate or parallel track. Or if you go back in time to the archaeology, one of the open questions was, should we even bother trying to normatively recommend and define any streaming serialization format for Qlog? And we have something we've done. Do we want to actually revisit that and strip all of that stuff out and just let people figure it out themselves? Yes, and on that topic, that's all I have to say. So I see some people in the queue. I'd love them to come up and throw opinions at me.
Well, first of all, thank you for that presentation. I know you have a strong opinion in one direction here, and I think you did a very good job presenting both points. So thanks for that. So the reason I think that JSON SAC is painful is well, there's multiple reasons. So you said you sometimes go and edit Q logs manually. And if you do that, like the weird thing is you can't type this record separator. You actually have to like go somewhere and copy paste it either from the same Q log, or you have to like Google the record separator and copy paste it from a website. So it's just awkward if you want to do that. Then like a common use case for QLog, let's assume you're doing more than just getting the QLog and dragging it into QViz, because then it just doesn't matter because QViz does the right thing. But let's say you want to inspect what was going on. Let's say you want to look at the trace and see how many blocked frames were sent because you're debugging some flow control issue. So what you can do, of course, is you can type the filter expression in JQ. But maybe that's just me, but I find that pretty painful to do. Like it takes me a long time to actually get JQ to filter stuff the way I want it. And it is just very convenient if I can just grab through the Q log and just grab for like packet sent and grab for blocked, and then I get all the events that I want, and I don't need to do any like JSON filtering there. And that's more painful if you use if you're using a JSON SAC. So the way to work around this is you would use JQ to transform your JSON SAC into new line delimited JSON, and then you would use grep. So it's possible. It's just like one extra step that you need to remember to do. Otherwise, yeah, if you have a QLog with new lines, then you won't be able to do the filtering you want.
Martin Thompson. I don't have as strong an opinion as the other Martin about what the actual outcome is, but I do have one opinion that I think matters here, which is pick something, just one, whatever it is. Having multiple options is the worst of all possible things, and the point of this process is to make those sorts of difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm. Are you, just to clarify that, if we picked one for the work we're doing now, we have one streaming serialization format, we have one now. Are you saying there should only ever be one, that somebody shouldn't go and do option 3 here, add?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's an argument against option 3 for sure.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eric?
This is kind of a weird world we're in now, because arguably the reason we didn't want to do a more compact, non-human readable binary format was because it is useful and something that a human can process and look at and deal with. And then we're now in this world where it's a little bit harder for that, and the tooling doesn't really support it, and you're going to have to build all of that ecosystem out. So we've kind of taken the cons of both and put them in. But at the same time, do we need to paint that bike shed? Could we just stick with one, and the tooling will get built where there are pain points and we move on?
That's a good point, thanks. It's reminded me, I'd forgot to mention something on the issue that we had discussed, that we could add more text on how to use this format for different audiences, right? So if you don't expect a human to ever look at this thing or process them with other tooling, then do the whole crazy embedded new line stuff. But if you have some expectation that you would like to do things that make it easier for your target audience, stick to a single line. You don't have to use the full capabilities of this thing. It might look ugly, but it's still simple enough that you guarantee that a grep would work without any required pre-filtering. I'm aware myself of time, and I would
Yeah.
like to get to our as time permits
I
talks.
just wanted to say something about the this is sort of as a chair, I guess. The thing that people I think should remember about the alternative options here. So, to Martin's point, second Martin's point, the pick 2 is probably not great, but also we should remember that the alternatives here are not RFCs. And while this audience may not have an issue with that, that's not the only people that get a say. And that was a significant consideration when we originally took the direction of JSON-sec, because if people remember, that is not the original way that QLog was formulated. So that will be another potential roadblock. And so that will come up in basically any of these options besides 4. But even that might still come up. So yeah, so we can try to very quickly get through Brian and Robin's comments, but then we'll.
Yes, very briefly, everything Martin said. One, without like sort of making a particular recommendation on these, yeah, beyond pick 1 and, you know, 3 is not one. And we can talk about whether 4 is one, but I don't think it is either. One observation I will make is that we in the IETF are very, very used to the serialization format and the user experience being the same thing. That is not how these things work. Like if the problem is that the tooling is not great, that's a simple matter of programming.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to make the same point as Matt, in that the main reason we switched to JSON-sec in the first place was that there was a fear that there would be a lot of pushback from the wider IETF when this goes past working group last call on accepting a non-RFC standard. And I have not enough experience within the IETF to know if that's an actual problem or a problem we fantasized. I could really use some additional input from more experienced people to let us know if that's actually going to be a problem down the line and how much extra work that's going to be, or if that's not an issue in practice. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think we need to hear that right now, but I would love to have some discussion on the list and offline on this, or on the ticket, etc. Like,
agreed.
We're at time. Let's wrap up quickly. Our goal would be to, again, without my chair hat on, working group last call by the end of the year. We feel like we can burn down these remaining issues. Implementation is lagging behind that, and that's not ideal, but I think it's okay at this stage. There are updates to QViz that are planned. Keisha's QLog crate has some of this in pending based on not breaking tooling. We could change easily, but then that might affect other people who depend on QViz to look at these log files, and then you're just defeating the point of them. Other implementations have some partial support. We would love to pick that up if anyone's interested, and just keep working on this to make sure that the thing does what we want. Thank you all. I would like to invite the next speaker up, which I think is Martin Ziemann, to talk about address discovery.
Hello. Next slide, please. So to give a little bit of context, and we already talked about this last year in Prague, exactly 1 year ago. And in the meantime, I wrote a blog post outlining the vision a little bit more. Like I'm imagining a world where we can use Quic for P2P, which means the entire thing you need for P2P. So that means discovering your addresses, proxying traffic, and doing the actual NAT traversal, meaning the hole punching. All of this we can do, or we could do, with a few modifications, with a few new drafts. We could do within P2P, within Quic. Sorry. So Next slide. How do we do proxy? Let's say we have two nodes that are behind a firewall, behind a net. They can't communicate directly yet. So the traditional solution is to use a turn server to proxy the traffic. How could we do this inside of Quic? Well, it's pretty easy actually, because the mask working group did all the work to define what's necessary. We already have Connect UDP, that's RFC 9298. It defines how you can send UDP packets in HTTP datagrams. And there's another draft in the mask working group. It's an adopted working group item, it's, Connect UDP Listen. And the basic idea behind it is that a node behind a NAT can establish a connection, a quick connection to a proxy, to a relay server, and ask the relay server to reserve a port for this client. And then the relay will send any traffic arriving at that port to the node behind the NAT. So there we have it. That's all we need for relaying. Next slide. I have another draft, which is not the draft that I want to discuss in detail now, that describes how you can use quick connection migration to do the actual net traversal. And I'm just going to present the high-level idea here. So to do connection migration in Quic, you already have to send probe packets on the path to see if that path actually works before you can migrate to that path. And the only thing we need to use this for net traversal is to have both nodes send probe packets at the same time. And that's exactly what hole punching is. So what we could do now is we could start with a relayed connection that goes via this mask relay server. The application already starts exchanging data, like you can already start your audio call or your video conference over the relayed connection. And then in the background, the Quic stack is probing new path and punching holes through the NATs. And at some point, hopefully ending up with a direct connection between the nodes and then migrating to this connection. All the while, the video call is already in progress and the underlying connection gets migrated to the better path. The details of this hole punching logic are still being worked on in this document. There's a couple of things we still need to resolve in terms of like how do you manage connection IDs for these hole punching attempts? How do you make sure that you're not sending too much traffic at the same time? How do you make sure that this can't be used as an amplification vector to target other nodes on the internet? I don't believe that these are unsolvable problems. I'm just saying this requires some more work. Next slide. So the draft that I want to talk about right now deals with a step that comes before all of this. Because at some point, a node boots up and it doesn't know in which position it is in the network. It doesn't know its IP addresses. It doesn't even know if it's behind a NAT or not. So the classical way to solve this is using the stun protocol. The stun protocol, the node basically sends a stun packet to a stun server, asks for the reflexive address, and then gets a response back. And we designed the Quic packet format so that you can run stun and Quic on the same UDP socket. So this is already possible. However, it would be nice if we could do everything inside of Quic, because stun is unencrypted and it's a separate software stack that you need to run. And it seems like this should be something that could easily be done inside of an established Quic connection. For example, the Quic connection to the relay server or any other Quic server that supports it. Next slide. So assume you have a a mobile device that has multiple interfaces, might have a Wi-Fi and a cellular interface, and it's talking to this Quic server. And what the extension does, it defines a new frame, the observed address frame, and the Quic server can just tell the client, this is your address, this is the address as it appears to me, and then the client can know if it's behind a firewall or if it's not behind a firewall. Next slide. So the way this works is we have a new transport parameter to negotiate this extension, and there's a couple of different modes a node can choose. Three modes. The first one is a node saying like I can provide address observations, but I'm not interested in any. The second one is the opposite. It's like I want to know my address, but I can't provide any address observations to peers. And then the last one is a combination of the first two. It's like I can provide address observations, and I also want to receive them. Next slide. This is the observed address frame that I mentioned earlier. And depending on what the nodes negotiated using the transport parameter, it is sent every time that a new path is established. So it is also sent on the first path, the path that the quick handshake is performed on, and every path in the future. In an earlier version of the draft that I presented in Prague, this was a request response mechanism. So there was a please tell me the address frame, and then you would get the observed address frame as a response. We changed this to this simpler model of negotiating what you want to know during the handshake, and then the observed address frame is just sent on every new path. This resolves a denial of service attack where one peer could flood the other peer with like, please tell me your address frames. Next slide. Yeah, so progress since Prague, as I mentioned, we removed the request response mechanism. We went through a couple of iterations on the draft. I think we are now on a 0.4. Christian joined as a co-author. We added a bunch of security considerations, and we don't have any outstanding issues on this draft anymore. Is there anybody who wants to comment on this? Oh, I should probably also mention there are now 2 interoperable implementations of this extension. One is in Quic, and the other one is in a fork of the Quinn implementation.
This may already be clearly stated, but I'm confused about what might happen if the mask relay doesn't actually have a public IP address, right? Because you could have a mask relay that was sort of enterprise specific. In that case, you'd need some sort of more hierarchy. What would you do? You'd run stun on top of this, or is it just not supported? In which case, you'd have to like do stun as well.
You can chain mask relays.
Okay, but if somebody wanted to deploy a mask relay where you're talking to it, and that's basically an enterprise relay, and they don't want to relay to anyone else, then this scheme wouldn't work, I guess, because you'd find out the private address of that relay. I mean, not to suggest that anyone should do this, but people love to do NAT, right? So
Yeah, I mean, this is the same as when you're running stun, right? Different nodes might have a different view of the IP address of the incoming packets, and you will need to deal with that. Best way to deal with this in the P2P setting is to ask multiple nodes and take the answers of multiple nodes into consideration.
Yaroslav Rosamach, I thought I was in the queue, but somehow
Yeah, disconnected.
Oh.
You can just say it. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Great work. One kind of security concern that I have, if you've got a client who is in front of some kind of per packet load balancing gateway where by mistake or by malicious intent, packets are oscillating between two source IP addresses. So it's not great, shouldn't be happening, but sometimes does happen. And in traditional Quic, that actually still works because of connection ID and things just work. And here you would receive, if I understand the logic correctly, here you would receive this address information frame for each and every packet potentially. So perhaps some protection mechanism against that or some rate limiting mechanism suggestion might be a good idea.
I think we already have what we need in RFC 9000, because what you're describing is basically a net rebinding that's happening very often, right?
It's not necessarily net rebinding.
But to the server,
it could be intermediary. It could
Yeah.
be misconfigured routing where you don't have per flow load balancing, per packet load balancing between two ISPs, and you have two different MAC addresses and things.
But to the server, it would look like a net rebinding, right? It would look like the address of the incoming packets changes all the time. And that's already an attack against RFC 9000 because every net rebinding triggers a path validation. And we already have text in the security considerations for this draft, which is basically you do the same thing as you do for the path validation logic in Quic.
Okay, thank you.
We have two people in the queue, just a time check. Just keep the comments brief, please.
Just a quick question for clarification. When Stun was created, there was Turn also an IC procedure for voice over IP. And one of the reasons where those boxes were different is that Stun was only used for discovery and was not supposed to be on the path for the packets for load reasons. Is there also in your mechanism a way for the proxy being involved in the address discovery to signal, oh, and then you don't want to be a relay if we are in a situation where there needs to be a relay with a public IP address somewhere? Antoine Fressanco.
Do I understand your question correctly, that you want to do only basically the coordination, but not the relaying of traffic?
Yeah, or separate coordination and relay of traffic because the load characteristics of those two boxes are very different.
Yeah, that is still something we would need to work out in the P2P version, in the net traversal section of the other draft.
Okay, thank you.
Brief, please, David.
Very brief. First question, what is your goal with this? Are you seeking working group adoption, or is this just trying to find folks that are interested and they should come to you?
It would be nice to get this adopted in the working group, yes.
Okay, then I would say right now that we have a solution without a problem, and I would not necessarily think that the adoption is a good idea. And let me explain why. There was a draft to do this by Tommy, Chris, and Eric 5 years ago, something like that, which, by the way, as I've been telling you, please acknowledge that in the drafts. That's the difference.
Happy to do it so.
Between plagiarism and actually, just using good ideas. But the reason we didn't adopt this draft is we didn't have a need for it. And I'm not seeing a need here because even though this is cool, I think this is a cool idea. Unless we have an app or, whatever you want to call it, something that uses this, then I don't think we should drive it forward in Quic. Because I think Lorenzo's point is a great example of something that will depend on the use case. And unless we have an actual use case that someone wants to deploy, this seems like we shouldn't put it in the Quic work group yet. Not saying ever, I'm just saying yet.
Lucas is making a poll question, so.
Just as a very brief show of hands, just give me a second. So yeah, the question here is kind of to riff on David's point. I would like an indication of, is this something that people feel the Quic working group should work on? There's other details we'd want to see, who's read the drafts and who would be willing to contribute in some way, shape or form, but just as a clear way to gather some opinion on this. David?
Clarifying question on your question. Do you mean they should work on it now as opposed to someday?
I mean,
Like
now.
Now-ish.
Ish,
No, thank you.
now-ish. Pending, other adopted stuff. Yeah.
But thank you for asking the clarifying question. Okay, I think we can close it there.
What was the numbers?
For the record, the numbers are 110 participants, 19 say yes, 7 say no, 19 have no opinion. And we'll take that information and go in and have some chats such as, Loz, you entered the queue, but we're over time, so.
What?
Please put your use case on the mailing list. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Martin. With that, Louis, we have one final presentation. About work on FlexiCast Quic.
Thank you. Hello. So I'm Luis from UC Louvain. Next slide, please. So the idea of this draft is to propose flexible multicast inside Quic. So I know there has been previous work, especially from Jake Holland, about this stuff, and he presented it some years ago. So the idea is to just present an alternative approach with details about how we can implement it inside Quic, and it leverages a lot multipass Quic, and so it's also written from our implementation experience. So yes, the idea is to have multicast inside the same transport as Quic, so that we can do multicast and unicast inside the same protocol. Next slide, please. So starting from multipass Quic, I won't do all the multicast stuff because you know it. But the question is, what can we do if we have this new pass that we create using different TLS keys than the first pass? And then if we do this, we could have this new pass, so the blue pass here, be shared between multiple receivers simultaneously. And we could have that the destination address, so the address towards the receiver, this could be a multicast address. And so we could have this pass which be received by multiple receivers at the same time. Next slide, please. So that would look like it. So that's why we call it FlexiCast, because it's flexible multicast. And so we would have a unicast pass. So for example, it could be the first pass that we have when establishing a connection with the server. And we have this unidirectional. It's important because we're using a multicast destination address, a unidirectional multicast flow towards all the receivers. And so the source can generate a packet and then send it to the network, and the network will duplicate using, for example, IP multicast towards all the receivers. And so in the draft, there are a lot of discussions about how we can advertise this multicast pass and how the receivers can join it, etc. What is also, no, on the next slide, please. Yes, what is also nice is that because we use a lot of multi-pass stuff, we can leverage this for the receivers. So, so what we change compared to multipass Quic would be that we require to have a different TLS key for each pass we create. But once you do that, you can just have, for example, the receiver receiving data through this multicast pass, or in the draft we call it the FlexiCast flow. We can just receive the data and then send the acknowledgements back to the source using the unicast pass and using the pass ACK frames. So this will just work like this. And for example, also for retransmission, so there was an interesting discussion about it earlier in this meeting. It could apply also here because we can do the reverse transmissions either on the FlexCast flow if it's for a lot of receivers simultaneously, or on the unicast path if it's just for a single receiver. Next slide, please. Yes. Okay. So I will skip this slide. Then next slide. Sorry. So yes, just the idea, but I will just give a quick idea, is that we can do multicast at the transport layer and still duplicate the packets at the network layer if we don't have an IP multicast tree. And this would still be maybe more scalable for the source, because instead of generating a new Quic packet, encrypting it, and sending it to the network, we can just generate a single packet for the FlexiCast flow, and then duplicate the bytes changing the unicast IP addresses. Next slide, please. Yes, so just to say that there are some aspects that are taken from Jake Holland's draft, and I think the idea is not to just erase what has been proposed, but here the idea was to have another approach regarding the implementation. Next slide. And yes, here, yes, okay. Here, just to show that we have an implementation that works, and so here are some results using a limited benchmark. We're doing more results now on a larger scale, but on a limited benchmark, just to show that the blue curve is using a unicast Quic on a single core using a Cloudflare quiche, and using FlexiCast, we can scale to much more receivers, and we can also decrease the CPU usage at the source. So just to show that the implementation works, and also so the FC Quic send a message, it's the case where we duplicate the packets and change the unicast destination address, but also we can improve the scalability compared to your unicast Quic. Next slide, please. And so, yes, so just I would be happy to hear some feedback if you have any comments. Don't hesitate to contact me for collaboration, or if you have any idea. The idea here is not to have to be this draft within the working group, just to get some feedback from the community if you have any ideas how to improve this work, or if you have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being so succinct, Louis. That was great. Just as take my chair hat off a second, being a prior life multicast enthusiast. We had Jake come to the working group a few years ago to present this, and there was a long queue of people. I recall I wasn't in the room, I was sick, but these kind of ideas have been floating around a bit. I think some of the integration with multipath can be quite interesting. As was just said, we're not looking to do anything specifically and looking for adoption right now, etc. But this draft's going to get more discussion or representation in the MBone session this afternoon, correct? So if anyone is like super keen and wants to discuss more in the multicasting aspects of this, do go along to that one. And again, that was presented back in Prague to that group, and it felt useful to come and show the Quic working group the Quic working that's happening in places and make sure we're not missing this stuff. So, Francois, I see you in the queue.
Hey, I had a question, but there's no time, so I will ask them for Mbondi. I just want to say that it looks like a really clever research work using multipath in a clever way. So I would love to see if you progress to see you present new stuff in next meetings. And I have a few questions that I will ask at Mbondi as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we're at time. So I would like to thank our note takers and scribes and everyone for the useful conversations and inputs. I see Lars has gotten up. We're over time, Lars.
I have 1 second. So tomorrow after lunch, there's a buff in this room called the Deep Space buff. And one of the things is a consideration of whether we can run Quic in space. So since you're supposedly interested in Quic, if you don't have anything better to do, please come to that buff and give your feedback on whether you think this is feasible. Thank you.
Cool. And Zahed, is there any final words from the AD? I'm seeing a big head shake. He looks really happy.
This is a good meeting. Thanks for doing it.
Yep.
That's the final comment.
Thanks all. And as always, we'll take things to the list for confirmation. Thank you.